My name is Rachel Montgomery, and what I'm about to share with you changed my life forever. It happened on the morning of April 4th, 2011, a day that started just like any other. I had been a member of my church for years, attending services faithfully and believing I understood what it meant to pray. I thought I knew what it meant to connect with God, but what I experienced that day showed me just how little I truly understood. That morning was calm and quiet. The air was cool, and a light mist hovered over the streets of my small town. Driving through those peaceful roads felt almost comforting, like the world itself was still asleep. I was just a few blocks away from my church, heading to our early morning prayer service, when my life changed in an instant. Out of nowhere, I caught a blur of movement, a delivery truck barreling through a red light. Before I could react, the truck slammed into my car with devastating force. I didn't even have time to feel fear. In those final seconds before everything faded to black, one thought filled my mind. Lord, I'm coming home. What happened next is something I can barely put into words. It was as if I existed in two places at once. Part of me still sensed the chaotic scene around me, the twisted metal, shattered glass, and the faint sound of sirens in the distance. But those sounds felt distant, like echoes drifting further and further away. At the same time, I felt something else, a sensation of rising, as if I was being pulled away from my body. There was no fear or panic. Instead, it felt natural, almost peaceful, like shrugging off a heavy coat. I remember thinking, so this is what it feels like to die. The world around me disappeared, and I found myself in a place unlike anything I had ever known. It was a realm of radiant, living light. This light wasn't just bright, it felt alive. The colors around me seemed richer, deeper, and more vibrant than anything I had seen before. The light flowed like liquid gold, yet it was soft and comforting, almost like a warm embrace. As I stood there, surrounded by this incredible presence, I felt something I had never truly felt before: perfect peace. Not just calmness, but a peace that seemed to fill every part of me. It was as if every fear, every worry, and every burden I had ever carried had been lifted in an instant. As I stood in that place, surrounded by light, I felt something even stronger than peace. I felt love. It wasn't just an emotion, it was something deeper, something so powerful that it seemed to wrap around me like a warm embrace. This love felt personal, like it knew me. Every thought I'd ever had, every mistake I'd ever made, yet it didn't judge me. Instead, it accepted me completely. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen, not just as the person I tried to be, but as the person I really was, and still, I was loved without condition. As I stood there, I began to notice movement within the light. At first, it seemed like gentle waves, but soon I realized these were beings, not people exactly, but radiant presences that seemed to glow with warmth and purpose. They moved gracefully, almost like they were part of the light itself. One of these beings drew closer to me, and though it never spoke with words, I somehow knew what it was saying. Its presence filled me with a sense of welcome, comfort, and peace so overwhelming that I felt tears forming, though I no longer had a body to cry with. It felt as if this being had known me my entire life, my joys, my struggles, my failures, yet there was no shame, only love. Then, this being began to show me something incredible. It was like watching my life unfold before me, but not just moments from my past. Instead, I saw the ripple effects of my actions, how small things I had said or done had impacted others in ways I never imagined. I saw moments where a simple word of kindness had changed someone's day, which in turn impacted someone else, creating a chain reaction that spread far beyond what I had ever realized. But I also saw moments of hurt, times when I'd spoken carelessly or let anger take control, and those moments rippled outward too. I watched as my words and actions, both good and bad, stretched far beyond what I had ever intended. What struck me most was that there was no judgment. I didn't feel accused or condemned. Instead, I felt like I was being shown these moments to understand, to learn, and to grow. It was as if God was saying, "See how much your life matters? See how much your choices shape the world around you." I had never realized before how powerful even the smallest moments could be, and yet, standing there in that place of perfect peace, I understood it all so clearly. As I processed what I was seeing, I felt a shift in the atmosphere, a presence unlike anything I had felt before. The light, which had already been so warm and powerful, suddenly grew even brighter. There was a stillness that seemed to press into every part of me, and I knew, without a doubt, that I was now in the presence of God. I can't fully describe what it felt like to stand before Him. It wasn't like being in front of a king or some powerful figure. It was more than that. It was as if I was standing in front of love itself. His presence was overwhelming, yet somehow gentle at the same time. I felt completely exposed. Every thought, every choice, every hidden part of my heart, yet there was no shame. Instead, I felt an acceptance so deep it brought me to what I can only describe as tears of the soul. I knew He saw everything, the moments I was proud of, and the ones I desperately wished I could erase, yet I still felt completely loved. Then, God spoke to me, not with words exactly, but with something even stronger. It was as if His voice poured directly into my heart, filling me with a truth so clear I couldn't deny it. His first words shook me to my core. "Do you now understand what it means to truly pray?" In that moment, I knew exactly what He meant. Memories of my life flooded back, mornings spent rushing through prayer out of habit, times I had recited words without really meaning them, moments I had bowed my head but kept my mind elsewhere. I realized that so much of what I had believed was prayer had been empty, just words spoken out of obligation. But in that moment, God showed me what true prayer was, not recited words or religious routines, but real connection. It was raw, honest, and deeply personal. It was about opening my heart to Him, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. As this truth settled into my heart, I was shown something even deeper, a series of visions that revealed what true prayer looked like across time and place. I saw a young mother from centuries ago, kneeling beside her sick child. She wasn't reciting scripture or following some formal routine. She was simply crying out to God from the depths of her soul. Her words were few, but her heart was fully open, pouring out everything she felt: fear, love, desperation. I could feel the power in her prayer, stronger than any polished words I had ever spoken in church. Next, I saw a man in chains, a slave, his body battered and broken, yet his spirit lifted in silent communion with God. His lips barely moved, yet his prayer radiated from him like light, filled with hope and trust despite his suffering. I saw moments of people praying in offices, bedrooms, and hospital rooms, ordinary people, whispering quiet, heartfelt words to God. None of it was rehearsed or perfect, but it was real, and I understood that this was what God desired. Not flawless words, but sincerity and surrender. Then I was shown something that shook me to my core. I saw Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. But this wasn't like anything I had imagined before. This wasn't just a story from the Bible. I felt as if I was there, witnessing His pain firsthand. I could feel the weight he carried, the burden of the world's sin pressing down on him. I watched as he knelt, trembling, sweat pouring down his face, and I heard him whisper those powerful words, "Not my will, but yours be done." I suddenly realized that this was the purest, most perfect form of prayer, total surrender. Jesus wasn't just asking God for help, he was giving up control, trusting his Father completely, even knowing the unimaginable pain that lay ahead. I understood in that moment that real prayer isn't about asking for what we want. It's about trusting God enough to say, even if things don't go my way, I know you have a purpose. As I watched Jesus in that moment of surrender, I realized how different his prayer was from mine. For so much of my life, my prayers had been about asking God for things, guidance, protection, answers. But what Jesus showed me was something far deeper, a prayer that wasn't about changing God's mind, but about aligning with his will. Then God turned my attention to my own life. I saw myself sitting in church, repeating prayers without truly thinking about what I was saying. I remembered times I had prayed before meals, mindlessly rushing through the words just to get them over with. I saw myself asking God for things, but never truly listening for his response. Yet I also saw moments when I had prayed with real sincerity, times I cried out to God in desperation, not knowing what else to do. And those moments, those raw, honest prayers, had created ripples that stretched far beyond what I had imagined. I realized that God had never been distant. He had always been near, listening to even my weakest whispers. The prayers I had once believed were too small or insignificant had actually carried weight, not because of the words I used, but because of the heart behind them. I understood that true prayer wasn't about following the perfect steps. It was about surrendering my heart to God, trusting him fully, and inviting him into my life as it was, messy, complicated, and imperfect. Then God spoke to me again. This time his words were filled with both tenderness and urgency. Tell them, not more prayer, but truer prayer. Not longer prayers, but more genuine ones. I knew exactly what he meant. So many people like me, had spent their lives performing in prayer, thinking they had to say the right things to get God's attention. But God wanted something different. He wanted honesty, vulnerability, and surrender. He wanted people to come to him as they were, not perfect, not polished, just real. As those words echoed in my heart, I felt their weight, not just as a message for me, but as something I was meant to share with others. God wasn't asking for grand speeches or memorized words. He was calling people back to something simple yet powerful, a real, personal connection with him. Then I was shown what would happen if people embraced this truth. I saw families being restored, relationships that had been broken by anger and bitterness suddenly softened and healed through the power of sincere prayer. I saw churches that had once felt dry and lifeless suddenly come alive again, not because of louder worship or longer sermons, but because people were praying from their hearts, truly connecting with God in a way they never had before. I saw individuals weighed down by guilt or shame, finally finding freedom as they poured out their hearts to him, no longer trying to hide, no longer pretending to be something they weren't. But I was also shown something heartbreaking, people who had spent their entire lives attending church, yet had never experienced this kind of connection with God. I saw faces filled with confusion and frustration, people who had been faithful in their routines, but still felt distant from him. God's words came to me again. Tell them I am near. Tell them I hear every whisper of their hearts. Then everything began to change. The light around me started to dim, and I felt something pulling me back. I didn't want to leave. How could I? The peace, the love, the overwhelming sense of belonging. I wanted to stay in that presence forever. But I knew I couldn't. I had been given a message, a mission, and God was sending me back to share it. Just before I returned, I asked one final question, the question that had been weighing on my heart even before the accident. I looked toward God's presence and asked, "Was Jesus really your son?" The answer came swiftly, yet it shook me to my core. "He is my heart, given for you. Not just my son, but my very essence poured out in love. And through him, you too are my child." Those words washed over me with a power I can't fully describe. In that moment, I understood Jesus wasn't just a figure from history or someone we honor in church. He was the living, breathing expression of God's love, the very heart of God, willingly given to save us. And through him, I realized I wasn't just a believer, I was his child. Then, in an instant, I was back. The warmth of heaven was gone, replaced by the cold pavement beneath me. The flashing lights of the ambulance filled my vision, and I could hear the panicked voices of paramedics working to save me. My body ached, but none of that mattered. My heart was still burning with what I had experienced. As I recovered, I couldn't stop thinking about what God had shown me. I knew I had to share it, that there were people out there just like me who had spent years going through the motions, thinking they were doing enough, but never truly connecting with God. So I'm here now to tell you this. Prayer isn't about finding the perfect words or following a script. It's about opening your heart to God, honestly, fully, and without fear. Whether you're sitting in a church pew or alone in your car, God is near. He's listening not for fancy words, but for you. If you've been struggling to connect with God or feeling like your prayers are empty, I encourage you, start fresh. Talk to him like you would a friend. Be real, be honest, and know that he's waiting for you. Arms open, heart full of love, ready to meet you exactly where you are. And if you've ever wondered about Jesus, if you've doubted or questioned his place in all of this, remember what God told me. He is my heart, given for you. I know now that everything I experienced wasn't just for me. It's for you too. So please, if this message has touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let them know that God is closer than they think, and that he's waiting to meet them in the quiet places of their heart. That experience changed everything for me. Before that day, I thought I knew what it meant to be a Christian. I thought showing up to church, reading my Bible, and saying my prayers was enough. But what God showed me was that he never wanted my routine, he wanted me. My heart, my honesty, my willingness to surrender to him, even when I didn't have the right words. I won't pretend that things were easy after I returned. There were moments of doubt, times when I wondered if I had imagined it all. But every time those doubts crept in, I remembered how it felt to stand in that presence, to be fully known and still completely loved. I remembered the warmth of that light and the power of God's voice speaking directly to my heart. That's what kept me going. That's what keeps me going even now. If you're watching this and you've been feeling distant from God, if you've been wondering why your prayers feel empty or like no one's listening, I need you to know this. God is listening. He's closer than you think, and he's been waiting for you to invite him in. It doesn't matter how many times you've messed up, how long you've been away from him, or how broken you feel, he's still there. He's still listening. And he's still loving you just as you are. I believe that God brought you to this video for a reason. Maybe you've been carrying guilt, pain, or regret that's been holding you back. Maybe you've been going through the motions, unsure if God even cares. I want you to know he does. He's been waiting for you to stop trying to be perfect and just come to him as you are. So I ask you, will you take that step? Will you open your heart to him today, even if you're unsure what to say? You don't need fancy words or long speeches. All He wants is you. If this story has spoken to you, I encourage you to share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe for more testimonies such as this one. Someone you love may be feeling lost or hopeless right now, and you never know how God might use you to bring them closer to Him. Thank you for listening to my story. I know this message wasn't just meant for me, it's meant for you too. So don't wait. Reach out to Him today, and I promise you, He's already reaching out to you.